My Experience with ALS by Stephen Hawking. I am quite often asked, how do you feel about having ALS? The answer is not a lot. I try to lead as normal a life as possible and not think about my condition or regret the things it prevents me from doing, which are not that many. It was a great shock to me to discover that I had motor neuron disease. I had never been very well coordinated physically as a child. I was not good at ball games, and my handwriting was the despair of my teachers. Maybe for this reason, I didn't care much for sport or physical activities. But things seemed to change when I went to Oxford at the age of 17. I took up coxing and rowing. I was not boat race standard, but I got by at the level of inter-college competition. In my third year at Oxford, however, I noticed that I seemed to be getting more clumsy and I fell over once or twice for no apparent reason. But it was not until I was at Cambridge in the following year that my father noticed and took me to the family doctor. He referred me to a specialist, and shortly after my 21st birthday, I went into hospital for tests. I was in for 2 weeks, during which I had a wide variety of tests. They took a muscle sample from my arm, stuck electrodes into me, and injected some radio-opaque fluid into my spine and watched it going up and down with x-rays as they tilted the bed. After all that, they didn't tell me what I had, except that it was not multiple sclerosis and that I was an atypical case. I gathered, however, that they expected it to continue to get worse and that there was nothing they could do except give me vitamins. I could see that they didn't expect them to have much effect. I didn't feel like asking for more details because they were obviously bad. The realization that I had an incurable disease that was likely to kill me in a few years was a bit of a shock. How could something like that happen to me? Why should I be cut off like this? However, while I had been in hospital, I had seen a boy I vaguely knew die of leukemia in the bed opposite me. It had not been a pretty sight. Clearly, there were people who were worse off than me. At least my condition didn't make me feel sick. Whenever I feel inclined to be sorry for myself, I remember that boy. Not knowing what was going to happen to me or how rapidly the disease would progress, I was at a loose end. The doctors told me to go back to Cambridge and carry on with the research I had just started in general relativity and cosmology. But I was not making much progress because I didn't have much mathematical background. And anyway, I might not live long enough to finish my PhD. I felt somewhat of a tragic character. I took to listening to Wagner, but reports in magazine articles that I drank heavily are an exaggeration. The trouble is once one article said it, other articles copied it because it made a good story. Anything that has appeared in print so many times must be true. My dreams at that time were rather disturbed. Before my condition had been diagnosed, I had been very bored with life. There had not seemed to be anything worth doing. But shortly after I came out of hospital, I dread that I was going to be executed. I suddenly realized that there were a lot of worthwhile things I could do if I were reprieved. Another dream that I had several times was that I would sacrifice my life to save others. After all, I were going to die anyway. It might as well do some good. But I didn't die. In fact, although there was a cloud hanging over my future, I found to my surprise that I was enjoying life in the present more than before. I began to make progress with my research and I got engaged to a girl called Jane Wild, who I had met just about the time my condition was diagnosed. That engagement changed my life. It gave me something to live for, but it also meant that I had to get a job if we were to get married. I therefore applied for a research fellowship at Gonville and Case College, Cambridge. To my great surprise, I got a fellowship and we got married a few months later. The fellowship at Case took care of my immediate employment problem. I was lucky to have chosen to work in theoretical physics because that was one of the few areas in which my condition would not be a serious handicap. And I was fortunate that my scientific reputation increased at the same time that my disability got worse. This meant that people were prepared to offer me a sequence of positions in which I only had to do research without having to lecture. We were also fortunate in housing. When we were married, Jane was still an undergraduate at Westfield College in London, so she had to go up to London during the week. This meant that we had to find somewhere I could manage on my own, and which was central because I could not walk far. I asked the college if they could help, but was told by the then bursar it is college policy not to help fellows with housing. We therefore put our name down to rent one of a group of new flats that were being built in the marketplace. However, we returned to Cambridge from a visit to America after the marriage. We found that the flats were not ready. As a great concession, the bursar said we could have a room in a hostel for graduate students. He said, "We normally charge 12 shillings and 6 pence a night for this room. However, as there will be 2 of you in the room, we will charge 25 shillings. We stayed there only 3 nights. Then we found a small house about 100 yards from my university department. It belonged to another college who had let it to one of its fellows. However, he had moved out to our house he had bought in the suburbs. He sublet the house to us for the remaining 3 months left on his lease. During those 3 months, we found that another house in the same road was standing empty. A neighbor summoned the owner from Dorset and told her that it was a scandal that her house should be empty when young people were looking for accommodation. So she let the house to us. After we had lived there a few years, we wanted to buy the house and do it up. So we asked my college for a mortgage. However, the college did a survey and decided it was not a good risk. In the end, we got a mortgage from a building society and my parents gave us the money to do it up. We lived there for another 4 years, but it became too difficult for me to manage the stairs. By this time, the college appreciated me rather more and there was a different bursar. They therefore offered us a ground floor flat in a house that they owned. This suited me very well because it had large rooms and wide doors. It was sufficiently central that I could get to my university department or the college in my electric wheelchair. It was also nice for our 3 children because it was surrounded by garden, which was looked after by the college gardeners. Up to 1974, I was able to feed myself and get in and out of bed. Jane managed to help me and bring up the children without outside help. However, things were getting more difficult, so we took to having one of my research students living with us. In return for free accommodation and a lot of my attention, they helped me get up and go to bed. In 1980, we changed to a system of community and private nurses who came in for an hour or 2 in the morning and evening. This lasted until I got pneumonia in 1985. I had to have a tracheostomy operation. After this, I had to have 24-hour nursing care. This was made possible by grants from several foundations. Before the operation, my speech had been getting slurred, so that only a few people who knew me well could understand me. But at least I could communicate. I wrote scientific papers by dictating to a secretary, and I gave seminars through an interpreter who repeated my words more clearly. However, the tracheostomy operation removed my ability to speak altogether. For a time, the only way I could communicate was to spell out words letter by letter by raising my eyebrows when someone pointed to the right letter on a spelling card. It is pretty difficult to carry on a conversation like that, let alone write a scientific paper. However, a computer expert in California called Walters heard of my plight. He sent me a computer program he had written called Equalizer. This allowed me to select words from a series of menus on the screen by pressing a switch in my hand. The program could also be controlled by a switch operated by head or eye movement. When I have built up what I want to say, I can send it to a speech synthesizer. At first, I just ran the Equalizer program on a desktop computer. However, David Mason of Cambridge Adaptive Communication fitted a small portable computer and a speech synthesizer to my wheelchair. This system allowed me to communicate much better than I could before. I can manage up to 15 words a minute. I can either speak what I have written or save it on disk. I can then print it out or call it back and speak it sentence by sentence. Using this system, I have written a book and dozens of scientific papers. I have also given many scientific and popular talks. They have all been well received. I think that is in a large part due to the quality of the speech synthesizer, which is made by Speech Plus. One's voice is very important. If you have a slurred voice, people are likely to treat you as a mentally deficient. Does he take sugar? This synthesizer is by far the best I have heard because it varies the intonation and doesn't speak like a dialect. The only trouble is that it gives me an American accent. However, the company is working on a British version. I have had motor neuron disease for practically all my adult life. Yet, it has not prevented me from having a very attractive family and being successful in my work. This is thanks to the help I have received from Jane, my children, and a large number of other people and organizations. I have been lucky that my condition has progressed more slowly than is often the case, but it shows that one need not lose hope.